Does Donald Trump feel the threat of letting the war in Ukraine in the hand of Europeans? If someone does something stupid, attacking Russia from Poland, from
They're
Germany.
not going to. There's no if there, Nima. There's just no if. Literally, there's no if. You cannot articulate a cognizable plan. No one can. How many Polish troops are going to attack Russia, when and where and how? With what army? They don't have one. They
That's
have
why
hundreds
they
of thousands
they
of
want to
troops.
bring the United States in. I'm not
We're
talking
not
about
going to. I just told you we're not going to do it. We're done. It isn't going to happen. We're not going to be suckered in. There's not going to be a NATO war against Russia because NATO doesn't have any capability at all. None. Zero. Nothing. It's all advantage Russia. Straight up. So I don't lose too much sleep over it. I more worry about strategic confrontation between the United States and Russia than I worry about a European provocation because Europe is broken. They're broken. Nima, there's not a military in Europe today that can sustain a campaign in Ukraine for longer than a month of meaningful proportions. Logistics. And without the United States, Europe cannot do anything. Nothing. 2,000 French troops. That's what they're talking about. 2,000. Ukraine loses between 2,300 and 3,000 troops a day. So France is willing to provide enough troops to sacrifice on the battlefield for less than 24 hours. And that's it. That's the French commitment. And Russia's going to lose sleep over this. No, there's nothing going to happen from NATO. When the drones flew into Poland, what was the German response? 2 typhoons? Two. The Netherlands, they put in 2 F-35s. Great Britain flew it. That's it. Want to know why? Because to deploy aircraft is an expeditionary capability. That means that you have to leave the base where you operate from and go to another base that's prepared to receive you, maintain your aircraft, fuel your aircraft, do all that support. And Europe has no capability whatsoever to do that. You can't just take a French squadron and fly them to a Polish airfield and operate from the Polish airfield unless you have French infrastructure in place. It doesn't exist. That's the fatal flaw of NATO. It used to be there was interoperability. Back in the 1980s, NATO was designed to be an interoperable force. So one NATO base was like another NATO base, like another NATO base. So if you had to transfer a squadron of F-15s from Spangdahlem, to Bitburg, you could do it without blinking. The Germans could deploy F-104s to any base because the infrastructure was there. We trained to do this. As divisions advanced, logistical trains from a corps could support a German division, they could support an American division, they could support a British brigade. They could do it all because we trained that way for interoperability. There is no interoperability today at all. None. A Polish division requires unique support and sustainment requirements separate from that of the American brigade that will be fighting alongside. So that means we need 2 parallel logistical support capabilities operating on a single line of communication. Do you understand how fatally stupid this is? Because if you know about logistics, you'll know what I'm talking about. You're going to be putting a lot of trucks with a lot of fuel and a lot of ammunition on one highway, and they're all going to die. And when that happens, the 4 deployed troops run out of fuel, run out of ammunition, and they get killed. This is the reality of this war. NATO to fight Russia has to go through Ukraine to get to Russia. They will not make it there. They will die before they get there. This is the reality. NATO is a joke. They don't train to do this, and they don't have time to train to do this. It took us decades of concerted effort, spending hundreds of billions of dollars to train NATO to be the army that existed, the military alliance that existed in the late 1980s. The greatest military alliance ever made. Nothing will ever come close to that. But it's gone. It's finished. The NATO of today is not that. They can't do that. They don't have that capability, and they're never going to be able to rebuild that capability because it all hinged on the great United States of America. Back when we had 300,000 troops forward deployed in West Germany, when we had military bases all over West Germany, they don't exist today. With 30,000 troops in Germany, come on, man, we had 300,000. And we could immediately deploy within 10 days another 250,000. We had the equipment already pre-deployed in Germany. All we had to do is fly in the troops, marry up with the equipment. It was all maintained, ready to go, start the engine, fully loaded for combat, go to war. You can't do that today. Not even close. It takes 6 months for an American brigade to receive its warning order to be loaded onto ships and be sailed into Hamburg, where they would then offload, and then they get caught up in the train system because you can't cross borders. There's no customs and control there. They haven't figured that one out. The bridges, the rail, nothing can handle military traffic nowadays. Nothing. It all used to be designed to handle it. Today, nothing handles it. It's a joke, Nima, an absolute tragic joke. So people need to stop giving NATO capabilities that simply don't exist. I don't care how many times a Belgian defense minister wants to puff his chest out and say stupid things. There's only one army in Europe today capable of fighting the Russians, and that's the Ukrainian army, and they're being slaughtered at a rate of 2.3 to 3,000 a day.
Being in Russia and talking with the people in Russia, and do they feel that they need to, improve the relationship between Russia and Europe, or they don't see Europe as a viable, partner anymore?
It hasn't been too long since Russia and Europe had viable economic relations. We're talking 4 years. And so I'd be a liar if I said that there wasn't a fondness for Europe amongst people. But that fondness is rapidly dissipating. Rapidly. First of all, Europe has emerged as sort of a sick society. Russia is not a perfect nation. They have their problems. You don't need to highlight them, but it's for a nation that has great family values, why are there so many single mothers? There's problems in Russia just like there's problems everywhere.
Yeah.
But the Russians are aware of their problems. Then they do their best. I can tell you that I can't walk down the streets of Paris at midnight randomly and be fearless. You have to be concerned. I can't walk down the streets of any European city after midnight without being concerned. I can't walk down the streets of any American city after midnight. I could walk down the streets of now. I know there's a place in Moscow I could go where I could get in trouble. I mean, I don't know where it is, but I'm just assuming, just like any other place in the world, there's bad places, but I haven't found it yet, and I'm not looking for it. Moscow is a safe city, and that's reflective of. But it's not just Moscow. Novosibirsk is a safe city. Irkutsk is a safe city. Ekaterinburg is a safe city. Kazan is a safe city. Volgograd is a safe city. Grozny is a very safe city. Russia is a nation that's got its act together, and it's getting better and better every day. Yes, they're hampered by sanctions. Let's not pretend that sanctions don't come with a cost. I mean, any economy is supposed to function under, some sort of normalcy of relationships with neighboring economies. The normal transaction that takes place. Here, Russia is, sanctioned. It can't operate normal. Its economy had to make adjustments, and we're talking about major adjustments that are being made in a very short period of time. But the Russian economy is thriving. Donald Trump, the great American economist, president, Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury. Our economy, has grown 1.6% last year? Russia grew 4%. That's under sanctions. So the point I'm trying to make is the Russian people would like good relations with Europe, but they no longer feel like they need good relations with Europe. In fact, I'll give you, I was at the Metropole Hotel, and for one brief shining moment, it was like Russia of the old days, because the Metropole was filled with round eyes, white people from Europe and America who came to Russia just like we used to in the good old days. The Europeans, the Americans came to Russia to meet with the Russians, and everything was great. And the hotel looked like the good old days. And then one by one, the round eyes left. And I remember going to breakfast on my last morning there. I was the last round eye in the Metropole. It's all Chinese. All Chinese. Every single table full of Chinese delegations. And I mean, that is Moscow. The Chinese are there. And they're the ones doing business with the Russians. Now, Would you say that Russia would prefer to do business with Europeans? Maybe 2 years ago. Today, why? What does Europe have to offer? Nothing. They're collapsed economies. They're failed societies. China is the economic heart of the world, and Russia's on good relations with the Chinese. This is a strategic shift in the way of thinking. The Chinese are everywhere. Chinese cars are everywhere. China is everywhere. And all the people that try to say, well, the Chinese don't produce good, they produce damn good stuff. Their stuff works. It's high quality. And Russia's becoming accustomed to this. There used to be a time when the Russians would die before buying something that said made in China. Today, they're happy to buy something made in China because it's good quality stuff. And most importantly, the Chinese are their friends. You can't. Can you say that about the Europeans? No. Can you say that about the Americans? Sadly, no. The Chinese are there to do business, but do business as friends. They're not trying to impose things on you. There's no Chinese sanctions of Russia. The Chinese are there to do a business contract. Now, they run a hard deal, a hard bargain. I'm not saying the Chinese are giving the Russians, good deals, but the Russians know this, and the Russians, make the deals they need to make. But no, Russia doesn't need Europe at all. It doesn't want Europe. I mean, if the time comes when relations are improved, Europe just has to get in line. There's not going to be, oh, you're European, come to the front. And America's losing this window. There is a limited window where if we improved relations with Russia, we might get invited to the front of certain lines. But the Russians, I think we've actually missed that out because the hardening of the Russian position with the United States, to flip the script, as I already said, to say, no, it's not up to us to come up with a viable option for peace. It's up to you. And until you do so, we don't want to meet with you. That's a new reality. That's a hardening of the position. It's reflective of the fact that Russia doesn't need the United States. And we just proved it. We sanctioned their two largest oil producers. Is that an act of friendship? Is that something that's going to engender the Russians saying, we really want to do business with you guys? No. Russia wants to do business with the Chinese economy that needs energy and is willing to buy that energy from Russia. Even if it's at a discount, it's okay. At least Russia's doing business with it.
Do they see the window of partnership with the United States still open, or they feel that it's, is disappearing from the scene? It seems because Donald Trump was some sort of change in the, in the way that Russia feels about the United States. They saw somebody that they can talk with, which was a huge change after all.
I think we have to be careful here. The Russians are very pragmatic, very realistic. When I spoke with Anatoly Antonov, he was the ambassador of Russia to the United States. We'd have lunch on occasion, and the one thing that he said when he talked about American politics is he said, "We don't really care who wins. What we want is predictability. Whoever wins, just be predictable, because then we'll know where you're coming from. Be predictable for us or be predictable against us. But either way, we will craft a policy in response that allows us to do strategic planning and things of that nature. What we don't want is unpredictability." Well, Donald Trump is literally the single most unpredictable thing that's happened to American politics. Now, the Russians, of course, have had to adapt to that. I'm not going to put words in the Russian government's mouth. That's not my job. They get to speak for themselves. I'll say this, what I've interpreted. The Russians have said the things that needed to be said to create the potential for better U.S.-Russian relations. But they haven't fundamentally changed anything about how they do business and how they operate. And so even though they've said things about creating the opportunity for better relations, the fact that the United States has failed to take advantage of this has had no meaningful impact on Russia, because Russia didn't change any of its underlying fundamental realities. Russia didn't change its approach to strategic nuclear deterrence. Russia didn't change its economic priorities. Russia didn't change anything. The reality of Russia has always been to deal with the facts, not the theory. And potential of better U.S. Russian relations is theoretical only. There's been nothing of substance that's worked its way down, to the disappointment of many Russian ambassadors who have said, we're waiting. We're waiting for the United States to do something. We hear words, 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 but there is nothing taking place of a fundamental nature, a discernible nature. And so I don't think the Russians really care. I think they're fed up with Donald Trump. They won't say it because they're diplomatic and they always hope for better relations. But the hardening of the Russian position, where they flip the script, no longer are they, we're willing to work with the United States on this. No, the United States has to start working with Russia. And that's the signal that Russia sent. And I think it's important that they did that because I think there was a recognition that Russia's words were being misinterpreted by the United States as a sign of weakness. Not because Russia was weak, but because it allowed people like Marco Rubio, Keith Kellogg, Scott Bessent to say, oh, see, the Russians aren't taking a hardline position. That must mean that they're desperate for peace. So we just need to double down. And the Russians are like, we haven't changed anything. The Russians didn't slow their offensive. They didn't stop bombing. They didn't stop doing anything. Fact is, they put the pedal to the metal. But Keith Kellogg and everybody else said, no, Putin's weak, this, that, idiots like Gilbert Doctorow, it's weak, we're in the fall. Nothing close to that. But the Russians now have just basically said, no, we're going to send a different signal to the United States. We're done playing stupid games. And when you're ready to talk to us, come and talk to us. We'll be more than happy to receive you. But you're the one that has to come up with the plan, not us.
Does Washington understand how deep is the partnership between Russia and China?
They're about to get a lesson. I think Trump is supposed to meet with Xi Jinping in the near future. And I think he's
it's going to be today.
Today, yeah.
5, yeah.
And he's going to be schooled because the Chinese, I don't believe, are going to budge on anything. In fact, they're going to double down on rare earth minerals, and they're going to tell Trump to pound sand when it comes to Russian oil. And I think they're also going to say that any secondary sanctions against China on Russian oil will result in severe consequences for anything else, that there can be no trade relationship with the threat of secondary sanctions over China, that China will not allow its energy security needs to be subordinated to the whim of an American government. Now, what Trump does, I don't know. He's got, Rubio and Bessent are two, idiots who have been whispering bad advice in his ears. Hopefully Donald Trump will take the bull by the horns and bring an end to some of this nonsense. They're getting away with the bullying of India to some extent, but even the Indian government has said, from the state purchasing of Russian oil will continue. They can't control what happens with private Indian companies like Resilience, I think, is Reliance, whatever their name is, largest purchaser of private purchaser. They put it on hold because they're nervous about secondary sanctions. India doesn't have the leverage over the American economy that China does, so India has to play a certain games. But even India is not going to walk away from Russia. Look, they just signed major contracts with Russia on airlines. The Russians have built a Russian airliner made out of all Russian parts. Thank you, America. I'm sure Boeing's happy that Russia now has divorced itself from the necessity of continued contractual relationship with Boeing. The same thing with the Airbus. Russia will produce its own airliner. And India is now going to be helping Russia in this regard. So, Trump is going to come to the face-to-face with the reality that he doesn't get to dictate outcomes, especially to a nation like China, who actually holds all the cards.
Here is, Scott, here is what the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said about the situation, the partnership, or the sort of relationship between Iran and Russia.
In the world, not just in the US, but also in Europe, within the European Union, use this as a pretext for bullying, for use of military power against Iran, which we strongly condemn. We stand hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder with Iran, and it will be so further on. And we're very appreciative of all the support which we receive from Iran, politically and otherwise. It's important during this challenging moment.
Yeah, he's talking about we are shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand with the Iranians. And I know from the Iranian media, I've learned that You follow the Iranian media, you see those people who were interested in a better relationship between Iran and the United States. They're cornered right now. They're losing their power. Their rhetoric is just weakening as time goes by, and Iran is moving drastically toward Russia and China.
Yeah. Well, the other thing we have to understand is that the 12-day war, Iran was the nation that failed to ratify the strategic framework agreement with Russia. There was a lot of people saying, "Oh, look, Russia's not a reliable partner. They didn't do this, that, and the other thing." No, it was Iran that failed to
Which
do that.
was confirmed, by the way, by one of the main Iranian officials, which
Yeah.
Ali Shamkhani. He was the major, the head of negotiations with the United States. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the reason was they were keeping the door open for better relations. I mean, but where did that get them? Fake negotiations that set them up for a preemptive attack by Israel that killed significant members of their military leadership, tried to kill the president, tried to kill the supreme leader. That's what good relations with the United States gives you. And I think Iran has had a shockwave sent through it, a revelation that America is the least dependable ally you could ever want. And that it's not fair to tell the Russians, "Oh, you weren't a good ally because you didn't rally to us." Well, you didn't ratify the damn agreement. Now it's ratified. Now it's an agreement. And now watch what the Russians are doing. And again, one of the clearest examples of this is, because again of the Iranians failing to act early on, Russia's playing catch up, because the idea is now, how do you strengthen Iran to the point that there's effective deterrence against the continued attack by Israel in the United States? And one of the key weaknesses of Iran was in air power. Modern fighters capable of meaningfully engaging. We know from, I don't know if you saw the various interviews that were done on Iranian TV of the Iranian pilots, and how they talked about how they were locking on to Israeli aircraft, forcing them to break off contact. That's one thing, but they weren't able to actually threaten. I mean, they didn't shoot down any Israeli aircraft, but they were able to, respond, close with, lock on with radar, and force the Israelis to abort their attack profile, which disrupted the attack. But they need, a better class of aircraft. Russia has promised, I believe, the Su-35 fighter to Iran, but you just don't snap your fingers and make this happen. It takes training, preparation. There's, production realities. But I believe Russia, and the Su-35 is an aircraft that's in high demand now because of the conflict with Ukraine, et cetera. But Russia is working with the Iranians to get the Su-35 there. You don't want to prematurely deploy an asset that expensive to a country only to have it blown up on the runway, crash in a bad training exercise, or get shot down because they don't know how to fully use the aircraft. What Russia did do is provide advanced MiG-29 aircraft from Russian frontline squadrons. This is what people need to understand. These weren't aircraft pulled out of reserve and hastily refurbished. These are the best MiG-29s that the Russian Air Force flies. These are MiG-29s that Russia would fly in combat against NATO if called upon to do so. And Russia has diverted these frontline fighters to Iran, where they're flying today over Tehran, sealing off that Caspian Sea access point that the Israelis use, flying through Azerbaijan to come in from Russia. This is game-changing stuff that Russia's doing. Russia is a good ally. Now Russia and Iran have, finalized this new trade route that they're talking about from St. Petersburg down to Chabahar or Bandar Abbas. I think it's Chabahar. The rail line using Caspian Sea connectivity. This is strategic level stuff. This is going to create interior lines of communication. Again, for people who study logistics, this means that Russia and Iran will be able to have, economic intercourse without fear of interdiction on, foreign lines. You're not going to see the United States Navy stopping ships, blockading, etc. It's internal lines of communication. The same thing goes with China. China now has internal lines of communication with Iran that can't be interdicted by the West. This is good news for Iran. This is the strategic pivot to the east that Iran had been talking about doing for decades, and is now becoming a reality. And unfortunately, for those people. I can't condemn them. Look, I'm an American. I'd love to have good relations with Iran. And I can't condemn Iranians for wanting good relations with the West. But after the 12-day war, if you still believe that the West is a reliable partner, then you've got problems. Then I'm looking at, you're going beyond just wishful thinking, and maybe you're not thinking about Iran's best interests. Maybe you're working on behalf of somebody else, because no logical thinker today can make a cognizable case that the United States and Europe is a better relationship for fit for Iran than Russia or China.
Iran has decided to have a strategic partnership with the United States. The leadership in Iran has decided that, and any government coming to power would follow that. And looking at the situation, because we know that what's going on in the Central Asia is always of concern for both Iran and Russia, even for China, because the United States is always there. And how do you see the situation between the two countries? Do you think these two countries are getting to the point to understand the reality of the United States foreign policy? That's why they have decided they may get closer together to somehow balance the situation in the region in a way that favors them and helps them.
You are talking about Iran and the United States?
Iran and Russia.
Iran and Russia
together have
almost
a better understanding to go against the policies of the United States in the region.
Oh, absolutely. Anybody in Iran who still believes that United States wants to come to Iran and install democracy, I have a bridge to sell them, including the political leaders there who still think they exercise that. You cannot fix, as I already stated, the average so-called pro-Western liberal anyway in the world is a moron. I mean, they believe all those fairy tales. It's either moron or corrupted, so but other than that, but yes, it's Iran and Russia are actually natural allies in the region. There's no doubt about it. And fact is, as I already stated, then there was like a few days back, suddenly Azerbaijan says, oh yeah, we want this train line, let's build it. Like, okay, what a change of the mood, man. Yeah, it's a natural transport hub. It's natural, obviously, energy hub. And yeah, Iran's survival as the independent nation and nation with its own culture, with its own, all advantages and disadvantages, as it's always the case with any kind of nation, it has to be tied with Russia right now. China obviously plays a huge role there. And but yeah, Iran's prosperity lies not with the West. Those people who do not understand that, I don't know, it's their problem. But Iran's future is absolutely with BRICS. And then again, judging by what Russians and Iranians do in terms of the security, again, we don't know all of it. We can only, just apply a type of the speculation, if you wish, or assumptions. Obviously, military might of Russia is critical in supporting Iran in case Israel, which it will happen again, Israel, until Israel probably dissolves itself, until Israel decides to do something else against it. But I mean, the problem is obviously, which immediately throws us back to the United States. There's very little that the United States can provide to Israel, for example, except if the United States decides to bomb Iran. Okay, yeah, try, see what's going to happen, So, and that's what is at stake here. And yes, Middle Asia, yeah, all kinds of people try to, do all kinds of the mischief, the same as like Pakistan, which is essentially the, slap beach of United States, which the situation with Afghanistan, So it's very complicated. I'm not privy to any sort of, insights about the region, but Russia is working there, Iran is working there. There is certain coordination there to pacify the area, to pacify the region.
Because Andre, after all, looking at the peace, at the ceasefire in the Middle East, is so fragile. Donald Trump says that
Oh, there is
uh,
no peace. Yeah, it's all
there is no ceasefire. They're
yeah, it's all
attacking.
crap. I mean, it's all PR.
Andre, last time they attacked Lebanon, they attacked Hezbollah. You remember, in the southern part of Lebanon, they went underground fighting Hezbollah after decapitation, after the assassination of the leadership of Hezbollah. Then they came, asked the United States to find some sort of ceasefire. Right now, Tom Brock, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey and envoy to Syria, he says that Israel can disarm Hezbollah by force. How is that possible? If they went underground fighting Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon, how they can disarm Hezbollah after all?
Any American envoy to Israel or in the region there is a sucker and Christian Zionist and neocon by definition. As all those people, which are primarily most of the American political and military political top, they do not understand the war. They don't understand warfare. And then, of course, when you begin to throw in this factor of suddenly Russia and Syrian government, my gosh, who would ever thought, right? Remember, they were, as Larry Johnson correctly stated, they were opening, the champagne bottles. I mean, normal CIA supports terrorism. That's what they do. I mean, when Giuliani government, Assad have been removed, and all that. And yet they were expecting Russian bases off and all that. No. Fact is, they want even a lot bigger Russian military presence in Syria. There you go. Never. You remember that only the one who loves last is the really who really loves. So, and Russians are laughing all the way to the bank because obviously now the Syrian government asks them to not only maintain the bases in Khmeimim and Tartus, but they now want Russian troops and Russian military police on the border with Israel and Golan Heights. Wow, who would ever thought, right? Well, Russians, of course, put forth inevitably their all kinds of other conditions, including obviously the safety of Alawites and Christians and all kinds of other people in Syria. And but what can I say? I mean, if Israel thinks that it's a great military force, it is not. Iran, again, in 12 days, Iran just absolutely demolished them. That's why it is still it's censored tremendously, any kind of imagery. We still get those, from Israel. They were just devastated. They begged United States to help to stop this. Next time, if the beating comes, they will be beaten not a bloody pulp. They will be dead. And so that is what is happening. This is the dynamics. But again, as I already, that's basically my career. Only war decides everything. Okay, nothing we can do with our nature as the biological species. Okay, instinct of pugnacity. Even Einstein and Freud, they had this type of exchange, the epistolary, so to speak, thing, letters to each other, talking about the instinct of pugnacity. Then Bronislaw Malinowski, the great Polish, psychologist and anthropologist, he wrote about those things that we contain this pugnacious instinct in us, as there obviously comes from the evolution, survival of the fittest. But in United States today and in Israel, you have the extreme forms of that, because there are all kinds of the explanation why it is happening. But we have to understand, these are the people who cannot accept the fact that they are not that good at war. United States and Israel never have been good at war. Israel beating the, pardon my French, crap out of Arabs was due primarily to the Soviet Jews who went through the World War II and who went through Soviet military academies, who were the toughest SOBs you can find, And then, of course, they migrated to Israel, to their historical, as they called, lands. Yeah, you have those guys who go out and, what, can you imagine the military experience they brought about it? This is not what Israel today, what today's Israel is. It's absolutely totally different story. You have the bunch of the which is, what everybody knew about this since 2000s, that it's primarily the type of gendarme force with the heavy equipment. The only thing they have is like, oh yeah, we have Air Force. Of course you have Air Force. It's so easy to fight somebody who cannot shoot back, essentially. But Hezbollah humiliated them in 2006 at Litani. So, and what else do they have? The United States. That's the only thing. But what is the United States? Conventionally, it's a paper tiger. It cannot fight real war in Europe. First, it will not be allowed to really deploy that, any kind of assemble troops, because they will be annihilated even before they get there, So this is the real war, not all this BS, which is called like global war on terror, which is the most dumbest title of anything, You cannot fight terror. You have to fight terrorists, real ones, not those false flags and what have you. And so, as a result, yeah, you have these two guys. They are, joined at the hip. United States is controlled by Israel. U.S. Congress is completely bought. They are completely corrupted. So, and there's no actually U.S. Congress. There is Knesset 2.0 in Washington, D.C. That's the only thing they will. Trump is absolutely owned. He's probably Israeli asset, essentially. So when you look at it, especially Ivanka is vetted to the guy who everybody spoke about is outright Mossad asset, So you have this situation. So let these two, get it on, as any way they want. The problem is, of course, as I already stated, and we already discussed it a million times, if they decide again to do something about it, this time Iran will be much better ready. They already wiped out pretty much most of their basically fifth column in fifth column, translating into the sabotage and terrorist groups acting in favor of, in Israel's interests. This time, many more things will fly into Israel, and they have literally nothing to stop it with. But the point is that, as we already spoke on the number of occasions about this, we have the confirmation of the Su-35s, MiG-29s, SMTs being there. People saw them flying over the Tehran and all that. There are some kind of the new equipment is being, basically delivered. We don't know what it is. We can only speculate. It is very much, closed topic. But I mean, if somebody in Iran still thinks that they have their future with the West, I have news for them. They can practice Satanism by moving their butts away from, Iran and going and living in Europe if they want to. That will fit them really well.